We all know the government has plenty of secrets, but the truth is even more unbelievable than you might think. From faking military attacks to working with Nazi scientists, today we're going to talk about a few of the most insane true stories in American history. Welcome back to part 2 in our series about conspiracy theories that ended up being true. My name is Oz, your local floor goblin, here to steal your kneecaps and bring you down to my level so I can regale you with interesting facts. Welcome back to Thinkology. In the first installment, we talked about using weather as a weapon, the government operating LSD-filled brothels in America, and other insane stories that sounded too weird to be true. And today we're taking a look at even more outrageous moments in history that would make even a tabloid headline writer shake their head in disbelief. With that said, let's dive right into it. The first conspiracy theory we're covering is on the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, naval battles are always intense. You're on a slow-moving ship in the middle of the ocean while the enemy is throwing bombs and trying to turn you and your comrades into shark food. That is the exact situation that the US destroyer Maddox found itself in on August 4th, 1964. Maddox was reportedly gathering intelligence off the coast of Vietnam when it was attacked by several North Vietnamese ships. Over the course of 4 hours, the Maddox and its crew fended off the attacking Navy using radar to identify targets amidst the stormy weather. A Time magazine article published 10 days after the event describes the battle. Gunfire and gun smells. Through the darkness from the west and the south, the intruders boldly sped. There were at least 6 of them, Russian-designed Swatow gunboats, armed with 37mm, 28mm guns, and P4s. At 9:52, they opened fire on the destroyers with automatic weapons, this time from as close as 2,000 yards. The night glowed eerily from the nightmarish glare of the airdrop flares and the boat's searchlights. For 3.5 hours, the small boats attacked in pass after pass. 10 enemy torpedoes sizzled through the water. Each time the skippers, tracking the fish by radar, maneuvered to evade them. Gunfire and gun smells and shouts stung the air. 2 of the enemy boats went down. Then, at 1:30 a.m., the remaining PTs ended the fight, roared off through the black of the night to the north. That night, President Lyndon Johnson addressed the nation. In his speech, he told the American public that the U.S. had been attacked and that retaliation was needed. In his speech, he reported that 2 U.S. destroyers were attacked by torpedoes, but the U.S. forces were able to sink 2 enemy boats without suffering any casualties. At the time, he expressed remorse, but having to use military force at all. But soon he would ramp military operations in Vietnam to be a full-scale war. Part of his speech reads, "It's a solemn responsibility to have to order even limited military action by forces whose overall strength is as vast and as awesome as those of the United States of America. But it is my considered conviction, shared throughout your government, that firmness in the right is indispensable today for peace. That firmness will always be measured. Its mission is peace." The attack on the Maddox prompted the passing of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which granted President Johnson an incredible amount of power with regards to the military. The resolution gave him the right to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States to prevent further aggression. After the Tonkin incident, U.S. military actions in Vietnam were immediately escalated, ultimately launching what we now know as the Vietnam War. Now, at this point, you might be wondering why you've never heard about this historic event. We all know about Pearl Harbor and how it prompted America to enter World War II, so why is the Gulf of Tonkin incident such a mystery? Well, the answer is simple. The reason you probably don't know anything about this super important attack against a US ship is that it, well, never actually happened. There was an attack on the Maddox 2 days earlier on August 2nd, but the supposed battle on the 4th simply didn't happen. On August 2nd, the Maddox was conducting reconnaissance near the Hong Nu and Hong Mi Islands. South Vietnamese militants were active in the area and had attacked North Vietnamese bases on July 30th and July 31st. And the Maddox had observed North Vietnamese torpedo boats chasing South Vietnamese ships away from the islands. An article from History details the attack on August 2nd. As it cruised along on August 2nd, it found itself facing down 3 Soviet-built North Vietnamese torpedo boats that had come out to chase it away. The Maddox fired first, issuing what the US authorities described as warning shots. Undeterred, the 3 boats continued approaching and opening up with machine gun and torpedo fire of their own. With the help of F-8 Crusader jets dispatched from a nearby aircraft carrier, the Maddox badly damaged at least one of the North Vietnamese boats while emerging completely unscathed, except for a single bullet that lodged in its superstructure. Now, it seemed like the first attack did happen. Former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara told CNN in 1996 that everyone was sure that the first attack was real, and according to him, he sent one of his subordinates to the Maddox to retrieve North Vietnamese shell fragments that were left on the deck. So, while the first attack probably happened, US officials almost immediately knew that the incident on August 4th wasn't real. James Stockdale, a Navy pilot who was flying overhead during the supposed attack, said, "I had the best seat in the house to watch that event, and our destroyers were just shooting at phantom targets. There were no PT boats there. There was nothing there but black water and American firepower." A cable sent by Captain Herrick of the Maddox reported that the review of action makes many reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful. Then he blamed the weather and his own crew for the mistaken reports. Freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonarmen may have accounted for many reports. No actual visual sightings by Maddox. President Johnson decided not to pass on this critical information to the public. Instead, he gave a rousing speech about how strong America is and used the opportunity to escalate the Vietnam War. When the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was passed, President Johnson was given free range to wage war without any congressional oversight. Here's what Robert McNamara had to say on the matter. The resolution gave full authority to the president to take the nation to war in Southeast Asia, but the Senate had been led to believe the president would not use that authority without seeking further counsel from the Senate. And he didn't. And in that sense, I think they were misled. The Gulf of Tonkin incident and the lies surrounding it are partly responsible for the nearly 60,000 American lives lost in Vietnam. Not to mention the untold suffering endured by both the North and South Vietnamese armies. Without this fake attack, the Vietnam War as we know it might not have happened. When talking about the event in 1965, Johnson said, "For all I know, our Navy was shooting at whales out there." Honestly, I can't say I'm surprised. However, this next upcoming one did surprise me quite a bit. Operation Mockingbird. Now, the term fake news has been thrown around a lot over the past few years, and there are plenty of YouTube videos and news articles making outlandish claims and conspiracy theories. It turns out that in the past, the news actually has been faked and influenced by the government. Now, let's take a look at the CIA program that secretly recruited 400 American journalists to help fight in the Cold War. This is known as Operation Mockingbird. Now, we've talked about the CIA's less than ethical methods before. From spying on American citizens to drugging unsuspecting victims with LSD, it's clear that the CIA plays with a different rulebook than everyone else. And Operation Mockingbird is no different. By recruiting legitimate journalists to work as secret agents, the CIA was able to influence opinions across the world. Okay, now maybe recruiting isn't exactly the right word to use here. While some journalists willingly went along with the program, others weren't too excited by the prospect of becoming an agent for the CIA. Journalists who dissented were threatened and even blackmailed into cooperating with Operation Mockingbird. And this wasn't some tiny little program run by middle management. Operation Mockingbird was so important that by 1953, it was directly overseen by Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA. Now, you might be wondering why we know so much about a secret program. We actually have the Church Committee to thank for that. The Church Committee exposed Operation Mockingbird during their investigation into abuses by the CIA, NSA, FBI, and IRS. This is the same committee that revealed the horrifying MK Ultra program to the public, One section of the report reads, "The CIA currently maintains a network of several hundred foreign individuals around the world who provide intelligence for the CIA and at times attempt to influence opinion through the use of covert propaganda. These individuals provide the CIA with direct access to a large number of newspapers and periodicals, scores of press services and news agencies, radio and television stations, commercial book publishers, and other foreign media outlets. More than a dozen United States news organizations and commercial publishing houses formally provided cover for CIA agents abroad." In 1977, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Carl Bernstein's investigation of the CIA's relationship with the American press and his findings were published in a 25,000-word Rolling Stone article. Within the article, he detailed the massive operation and how the CIA used American journalists for their own objectives. According to him, there were more than 400 journalists used over the course of 25 years. Well, you might be thinking that this meant the CIA was turning journalists into James Bond-type secret agents, and in reality, the tasks they did were less cinematic. For instance, some of them simply gathered information and reported back to their CIA handlers. Others were used as middlemen between various spies, and this wasn't just your everyday newspaper writers either. Bernstein revealed that some of the journalists working with the CIA were highly prestigious, including a few fellow Pulitzer Prize winners. So we do know that the CIA absolutely used journalists as covert operatives, but unfortunately finding detailed accounts is nearly impossible. This, of course, is by design. According to Bernstein, top-level CIA officials convinced the Church Committee to avoid investigating this particular issue. In his report, he described how high-level CIA members influenced the Church Committee. Future President George H.W. Bush is just one of the officials who Bernstein reported using vague and misleading terms to disguise the full scope of the operation. Now, before the Church Committee's report was even made, the CIA was already winding down on their use of journalists. In 1976, then-Director George H.W. Bush announced that, effective immediately, the CIA will not enter into any paid or contractual relationship with any full-time or part-time news correspondent accredited by any U.S. news service, newspaper, periodical, radio or television network or station. So how exactly does a government utilize its secret army of journalists/agents? The assignments the journalists were given varied widely. Some of them were simply serving as the eyes and ears, reporting things they saw and heard to their CIA handlers, while others were made to host private dinners where American agents could safely meet with spies from other countries. Well, there you have it. The CIA once again proves that it is easily the shadiest government entity. They sound like a villain in a Mission Impossible movie. Like, it's impressive if it wasn't so scary. Anyways, this will be the last time we bring up our favorite alphabet soup organization. Moving forward, we're going to talk about a personal favorite of mine. This is something that I really enjoyed learning about back in high school. Let's talk about Operation Paperclip. The government hired Nazi scientists after World War II to build rockets so America could win the Cold War in the space race. Now, this might sound like something your least favorite uncle would scream about at Thanksgiving, but it's an all too real part of history. When the Second World War was winding down and about to end, America and Russia both made a mad dash to recruit Nazi Germany's best and brightest scientists and engineers. The Nazis had developed several impressive weapons over the course of the war, including their prized V-1 and V-2 rockets, the first ever long-range guided ballistic missiles ever created. Annie Jacobson, author of Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America, describes how the program started. It's just a few months after the landings at Normandy, and you have Allied forces making their way across the continent, headed toward Berlin and Munich. And with them, sort of scattered among the soldiers, are these small teams of scientific intelligence officers, and they are searching for the Reich's weapons, and they don't know what they might find. One example was they had no idea that Hitler had created this whole arsenal of nerve agents. They had no idea that Hitler was working on a bubonic plague weapon. That is really where Paperclip began, which was suddenly the Pentagon realizing, wait a minute, we need to use these weapons for ourselves. After realizing the Nazis had valuable knowledge and experience in the field of weapons, the US brought back 88 Nazi scientists and gave them jobs working for the government. Obviously, working with Nazis wouldn't be great for America's brand image, at least at the time. So, The operation was kept top secret and the Nazis' past were whitewashed. This actually accomplished two goals. First, the public didn't find out that their government was working with the same people they were just at war with. And two, the government wouldn't technically be hiring Nazis if they destroyed any evidence that they were ever Nazis in the first place. One notorious Nazi scientist involved with Operation Paperclip was Werner von Braun. Von Braun is an incredibly important figure in American history. Without his help, there's a very good chance that America would have never completed the moon landing. Oh yeah, and he also handpicked the slaves out of concentration camps to work in his factory, so that's cool. Anyways, Annie Jacobsen talked about von Braun in an interview with NPR. In doing the research, one discovers that not only was von Braun a Nazi, but a member of the SS. And not only was he running the underground slave labor facility where his rockets were being built, he wasn't running the facility, but he was in charge of the science there. But when they were running low on good technicians, Werner von Braun himself traveled nearby to the Buchenwald concentration camp, where he handpicked slaves to work for him as laborers. For his contributions to American science, von Braun would go on to be included into the National Academy of Engineering and also be awarded the National Medal of Science. But America wasn't the only country trying to use war criminals for their own favor. The Soviet Union also recruited thousands of Nazi scientists. During Operation Osovekim, the Russians relocated over 6,000 Germans during just one night. These Nazi scientists were given an opportunity to completely restart their lives. Instead of going to prison for committing war crimes, they were celebrated by both the American public and government. When Nazi doctor Theodor Hans Benzinger died in 1999, the New York Times wrote a glowing obituary about him. They wrote about the scientific research he did throughout World War II and the rest of his life, described his education and accomplishments, but conveniently left out any mention of his past as a brutal Nazi torturer. And while Benzinger was apparently a great scientist, he did invent the ear thermometer after all. Everyone seemed to forget that he performed his research on concentration camp prisoners. Annie Jacobsen said that Nazi doctors in America all had different trajectories, but none of them seemed to have been held accountable for what happened and what they were involved in during the war. American movies about World War II often depict the conflict as a classic good versus evil morality tale. Nazis bad, America good. But our history of the event tells us that America stepped in to face the ultimate evil of the Axis powers, and the good guys won in the end. Although it kind of seems that conveniently they've left out the part where we hired some of the worst perpetrators of the Holocaust just so we could have better bombs to use in the future. It turns out that the government is, super chill about murder and torture, just kind of as long as those murderers and torturers provide something of value. Now, Operation Paperclip did lead to essentially what was the foundation of NASA, giving us leagues of advancement for aerospace engineering that the Nazis had previously accomplished with their V-2 rockets. We somewhat kind of, took the worst of the worst in order to get us to the moon, which I'm very conflicted about personally. Now, after hearing about all the weird and terrible things America did during the Cold War and other times, you might be wondering what our northern neighbors were up to at that time, and oh boy, are you gonna be sorry that you asked? Now, while the Americans and Russians were busy confiscating Nazi scientists to use to build rockets, Canadian scientists were a little busy working on, a real-life gaydar, aka a method of exposing homosexuals working within the government so they could fire them. This project came known, and I kid you not, as the Fruit Machine. Frank Robert Wake was a professor at the Carleton University when the Canadian government hired him to develop a method to find out if someone was gay. He developed several experimental methods, but the main test consisted of placing someone in a chair, similar to the kind that dentists use for their patients. Then, the test subject would be shown some normal pictures of everyday life, contrasted with sexually explicit images. The researchers would then measure the changes to the subject's pulse, skin reflexes, breathing rate, and pupil dilation. Gary Kinsman, sociology professor and co-author of the Canadian War on Queers, National Security as Sexual Regulation, said in an interview that this was, quote, quite devastating, unquote. He described how hundreds of people lost their jobs thanks to the Fruit Machine. When he talks about the interrogations that people were subjected to, it sounds eerily similar to the Salem witch trials of the 17th century, except at least these people only had their lives ruined, not ended. Documentary filmmaker Sarah Fode had this to say on the fallout people faced. In fact, for many, losing their jobs was the least of what they endured directly because of this campaign. Poverty, homelessness, having to go back in the closet, substance abuse, gay aversion therapy, sexual assaults, and for some, suicide. The consequences of this campaign, as one of our survivors captures perfectly in the film, was a scenario from a horror story. Now, ultimately, and thankfully, the program was a complete failure. The Canadian government wasted tons of time and money on one of the dumbest and most ridiculous experiments ever. And while it's easy to say something and look at something and just laugh at the absurdity of the situation, we have to remember that hundreds of people had their lives ruined over absolutely nothing. Anyways, back to our favorite alphabet soup. Now, James Bond movies are probably best known for the insane gadgets that the not-so-secret agent has access to. From deadly lasers to invisible cars, these movies are full of cartoonish weaponry. Now, if I told you that the newest James Bond movie features the agent using a heart attack gun to assassinate bad guys, you'd probably just shrug. But if I told you that the CIA actually developed this weapon back in the 70s, you'd probably be a bit more wary. Here's the thing though, that's exactly what happened. As we're all now aware of how sketchy the CIA is, this shouldn't come as a surprise. Project MK Naomi was a top-secret operation that was used to develop new poisons, biological and chemical weapons, and new methods of administering them. The infamous heart attack gun was a result of the research conducted during the MK Naomi. In a CIA confidential memo, the gun is described as a non-discernible microbioniculator, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. A New York Times article that broke the story reports that William E. Colby, director of intelligence, told the Church Committee that the CIA had created poison darts that were nearly untraceable, even with an autopsy or examination. Apparently, only a few people at the CIA even knew what was happening, and not only that, but Colby told them that almost no record keeping took place. Thanks to this, we will never know the full extent of the project or if things like the poison dart gun were ever actually used in the field. There's a chance the CIA operatives actually put this comic book weapon to use in the real world. Now, after the gun was presented out in public, it was handed over to the military for safekeeping. No one is really sure where it is right now or if more of them might have existed. But let's be real though. If you're the kind of government agency that creates heart attack guns, you definitely have crazier cards up your sleeves. Anyways, now that I'm on a CIA watch list, I wanted to thank you all for watching this episode of Thinkology. If you want your kneecaps back, you gotta like and subscribe and do all that kind of stuff. Yeah! Anyways, thanks for checking out part 2 of this conspiracy theories that ended up being true, and I'll see y'all next time. Check the description for sources and links.